Hello and welcome to today's McMaster University Continuing Education Caregiving Essentials webinar, Self-Care is Not a Myth. I would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we reside. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that it is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. My name is Jennifer, and I'll be your host on behalf of McMaster Continuing Education. Today, I am joined by our facilitators, Donna Thompson and Nicole Dawes. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Donna Thompson. Donna is the co-author of The Unexpected Journey of Caring, The Transformation from Loved One to Caregiver, and the author of The Four Walls of My Freedom, Lessons I've Learned from a Life of Caregiving. Donna is a patient and family advisor on health research and policy, and she teaches family caregivers in Canada how to advocate for care in hospital and in the community. She blogs regularly at the Caregiver's Living Room. Donna is the facilitator of Caregiving Essentials and Infection Prevention and Control for Caregivers and Families, our free online courses for family caregivers. And I would like to introduce you to Nicole Dawes. Nicole is a self-care advocate, a coach, author, and speaker who chooses happiness despite her circumstances. She's founder of Self-Care for Caregivers, and her mission is to change the story around caregiving and celebrate the journey. She honors the role of the caregiver by helping them recognize their worth and their true gifts. Experience is her teacher, as being the mother of a neurotypical son and a daughter with a rare genetic disease and autism. She approaches self-care in a liberating fashion that gives us all permission to take time for ourselves. She blogs regularly at NicoleDawes.com and published her first book, Self-Care from the Trenches with Love, Humor, and a Kick in the Pants, in November 2021. Donna, I'll hand things over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jen. And welcome everyone to our second to last caregiving webinar this sort of academic year, if you will. And welcome today, Nicole Dawes, my friend and my colleague in caregiving. And Nicole, you mentioned to me as we were just chatting that today is the first day of Mental Health Week in Canada.
Yes.
So is this a great topic to be talking about today or what?
Very timely indeed.
Yeah, that's right. So I want to begin, Nicole, by just asking you about your own caregiving journey, how you came to be thinking deeply about the role of family caregiving and about what it means to incorporate a practice of self-care into your daily life. Tell us about yourself and your family.
Oh, thank you. So these are my two children. I call them my greatest teachers. Summer is 13 and Jordan will be 16 this month. And so I was 5 years into my caregiver journey. And at that time, Summer didn't have a diagnosis other than intellectual disability. We had started early intervention. She did weekly physical therapy so she could learn to walk at 2.5, and then occupational therapy so she could get her pincer grip, so to hold a spoon and to put a sock on. And then at 6, she got her diagnosis for a rare genetic disease and autism, and that really opened up more access to resources for us. But at about the 6-7 year mark, it was when I realized that I was kind of hitting the wall. So I was working full time, and I believed and had tricked myself into thinking that I was managing everything. And when people asked me how I was doing, it was just like, I'm good, I'm fine. I didn't realize at the time that people believed me and then no one offered help. So my family's back in Nova Scotia, and it was, as many can relate, I was in survival mode. It was just getting through the day. And my body was sending signals to me. In hindsight, I can realize it was sending signals, but I was ignoring it because I was like, I'm strong. I've got this. I can handle this. And the unknown was just too much to consider and think of. So I just put my head down and focused on what I needed to do to help my daughter and manage my son as best I could. And then I ended up in the being at work, and my body was like, if you're not going to pay attention and listen, I'm just going to have to speak more loudly. And I had a full-on panic attack at work. And the reason why that's so significant was work was my safe spot. Work was where I was Nicole. I wasn't a caregiver. I wasn't a mom. I could eat lunch in peace. I could go to the bathroom and no one would interrupt me. And it basically, what happened is it hurt to breathe. I was just working. There was no incident. And then all of a sudden it was just pain in my chest. And I actually had to bang on a desk to get someone's attention. And then they realized that something was wrong and an ambulance was called, and I was taken away on a stretcher to emergency. And for a good hour, I couldn't take any deep breaths. So it was just short breaths, and it was painful. And even now, my goodness, 7-8 years later, I still remember that pain because we need our breath. We don't have our breath. We're not alive. And so it is, for me, that was the wake-up call, that instead of putting all of my focus on my family, that I needed to start taking care of myself. And I got mad and I was resentful because I was like, but I'm taking care of everyone else. Who's going to take care of me? And the doctor was like, after he checked me over, he was like, you're fine. You're perfectly healthy. You're good to go home, bye. And I thought, oh no, there are no doctors who specialize in supporting family caregivers, who understand all of the internal signs, the worries, the emotions that go with caregiving, all of those emotions. And that was really what started me on my path. And on that day, I decided, okay, what's one thing I can do? And I've always been active. So I thought, I'm going to start going to the gym. And I looked at my then husband and I said, I need you to help me get to the gym 3 times a week. And he was like, well, if you want to go to the gym, just go to the gym. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I'm asking for, and I would tell myself, because I worked all day, that I couldn't go in the evening because I needed to be home with the kids. So I would go at night after the kids went to bed, right? Guilt that I can't go to be at work all day and then not be home. And so that's how it started. And I went to the gym and it made me feel better, which made me sleep better. And then I thought, oh, I think I'm onto something. Instead of this negative spiral, I found a positive spiral. And it's baby steps. When I speak now about my self-care routine, and I'm speaking about self-care in general, I'm 7 years in. So I started with one activity a few times a week, and then I built that up and found different pockets. And I think what's so important, Donna, it's understanding that it was almost quieting all of the noise and really listening to what I needed and finding those activities that worked for me instead of people telling me what I should be doing. And so that's how I got to where I am now.
Hmm. It's so interesting, and I really would love to hear more, Nicole, about your philosophy
Yeah.
of self-care. How does one begin with baby steps when there are so many competing needs in the family?
Mm. So this is the slide, the reality, and just going back before I get into the philosophy is, I think another thing that's important too around self-care is it touches on the philosophy is there are no comparisons. And I find we talk about social media. I share these photos, and I know it's going to be on YouTube, but it's contextual. It is so people understand. You can see a photo of my daughter who's smiling, and we all know that's just 1 second. And so as caregivers, so much of what happens goes on behind closed doors. And that's another reason why self-care is so important. So if we go to the next slide, talking about self-care is not a myth. And then the next slide is what our philosophy is. So my self-care philosophy is we all deserve it. We are all unique individuals, which goes into um, what's right for me may not be what's right for you. But I share my self-care activities as I say, planting seeds. So as to inspire others just to take actions. And if you're new on this journey as a caregiver and not quite sure where to start, I'm like, you can borrow some of mine if you like until you find your own. And there's no right or wrong way to do self-care. And that's what I think is so important. And there's no judgments and there's no comparison. And the best example I use for this is one of my self-care activities is to cuddle with my cat, because the sound of a cat purring to me just it brings me into the present. And I know that if my cat's purring, that I am at peace. Because anyone who's angry, try to pick up a cat, they're not going to stay with you. They know. However, I have friends who are allergic to cats. And it's that simple. Cuddling with a cat's not going to be their self-care activity. And so that's just a reminder for people to be really gentle with themselves. And it's just to say, what brings me joy? Because that's my definition of self-care. And that is any activity that brings us joy. And that's why I say we all deserve it, and that there's no right or wrong way to do it. And then I always have to put a caveat as long as it's legal when it's activities that bring us joy. And so
I
I
want to
believe,
ask you too, just here for a second. The thought that's in my mind, Nicole, is uh, the joy that you have. This is something we talked about in preparing for
mm,
today, and it was such an interesting conversation. When you began to practice self-care, did you find that you were experiencing a greater degree of joy with your children, and particularly with Summer?
yes. And it's that whole discussion of, you know, we are only able to really give something as much as we're able to experience ourselves and receive it. So when I started, taking, and I say accountability, and I really mean that in the gentle term for caregivers. That's not a judgment statement, but when I realized, oh sugar, I am the only one responsible for my self-care, and how can I find pockets of time? When I did that, then it empowered me. And I realized, oh, I can find moments, not 24/7, moments of joy despite the chaos of my day. Then I realized, oh, okay, then I can then find this same joy with my kids despite the chaos of our lives.
Hmm. It's interesting, I was having a wonderful conversation a couple of months ago with a group of spousal caregivers. And we were talking about this idea of slivers of time,
Yeah.
and that you can do something that brings you joy, or just brings you peace because it requires concentration, concentrating on something other than the needs of your spouse in this case. And one of the women said, when my husband, literally, he goes to the bathroom, that's when I do Sudoku.
Okay.
And so she gets about 3 minutes, 4 minutes every time he goes to the bathroom. And I thought, that's something. Another woman said that she used the physical space of her cupboard. I thought of Harry Potter with the room under the stairs, but she goes in the cupboard because she said there are usually always home health workers or
Okay.
other people, and what she needs is privacy
See. Yeah.
and quiet. And so she set up a little chair for her that they had a walk-in closet, and that's where she goes. Um, and I thought, this is a very, very interesting conversation. And if people who are listening today have a sliver of time that you've ever identified, um, or a space of peace in your home or outdoors, do add it in the chat box and share, because I think this is a very creative conversation about self-care is not just a bubble bath. And we'll talk for a second, Nicole, about the public discourse on self-care and how it doesn't do us really any favors in finding real life ways of caring for ourselves while we care for the person in our family or friend
Yes.
that we love. So,
Can I add one more point though, when we were talking about the joy and then the peace, and I
yes.
thought I wanted to write a little asterisk, a PS, because someone has not corrected me, but pointed out that some of my self-care tips aren't always joyful. For example, I'll talk about the healing benefits of crying, or
Oh,
the,
hmm,
encouraging people to examine or ask themselves about loss and grief. And so, what I would like just to contextualize is that it's true, sometimes the joy comes after after the self-care activity. So I am embracing my tears, and so in the moment, if you need an ugly cry to release some pent-up emotions, then the relief will come after. So in the moment, you may not feel very joyful, but trust us when we say that it will come, or even the ability to process difficult emotions and allow ourselves, or if there are exercises around forgiveness, it may not feel joyful at the moment, but I think if we believe that the release of those emotions will bring us peace, and you may be surprised that later on joy will follow. So I just wanted to add that in.
yeah, it's so interesting that you say that. One of the webinar series episodes that we did here at Caregiving Essentials was about caregiver PTSD and trauma.
Yes.
And Dr. Pat McGrath was the guest, and he and I had worked together on a research project called Life Beyond Trauma about caregiver trauma. And, we were we're just reflecting in our conversation about how it's counterintuitive, but when you want to heal trauma, you must um, revisit the trauma in one shape or form in order to um, emasculate it, to get rid of its monster qualities, and to um, deal with it and put it in its place. So the analogy that I used was that if your head is full of files and they're filed in a particular way, each file being an experience, of course.
Mhm.
And it's unhelpful. They are, um, it's creating a mental kind of chaos and distress. You have to throw the files on the floor and look at them all and
Mhm.
refile them in a different order. And Nicole, I've been following your work for a long time, and I'm really interested in how you do that. How do you do that reordering? And I know that one of the tools you use is meditation.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us about that?
Certainly. Um, I think for me, when I first realized that my thoughts were not my friends,
Hmm.
and it that was like the beginning of like a whole new Nicole. It was, I don't know, all of the cliches are true. Turning 40, there was some big events that happened to my life. And then I realized, wow, my thoughts aren't my friends, and I actually can control my thoughts. And so that really started on the path, coincidentally, also, parallel to my self-care journey. And so now I have really embraced meditation and have really embraced, I don't want to say challenging my thoughts, but choosing to be in control of my thoughts. So whether it be affirmations, how I talk to myself, and focusing on how I want to feel instead of the yuckiness of where things are at. And that isn't easy. It sounds so simple, but it is not. When you are confronted with a a daughter who at the time wasn't walking and wasn't communicating and couldn't, I say, do much, it can feel very overwhelming, and to hope for a better future. But the flip side of that is what I say to people, but if you don't do that, then by default, you're choosing negativity. And people are like, but no, I would never choose that. And so it's just, again, stepping backwards to say, well, why don't you try it? Like, there is no harm
Yeah.
in choosing a better feeling thought, or even catching yourself. Like, one of the exercises I talk about is having people monitor how many times the word "I can't" pops into their head, or "I'm too busy." And so once I started doing things like that, "I'm too busy," I changed to "it's not a priority." And even that really makes such a difference. "I can't" to "how can I?" And with the meditation, what I'm really learning is it's not about what I do while I'm meditating, it's what happens between the meditations.
Hmm.
And I had told myself for the longest time, "Oh, you can't meditate. See, you can't meditate. Your mind never turns off." And then how I explain it to people, it's like, you're driving down the highway and the windows roll down and it's just constant vibration. And then you put the window up. Well, all sound doesn't disappear. It's just like more of a hum than the full vibration. And that's how I'm like, oh, that's how I feel like meditation is. It's like all of my brain, it's just like, it's like I put the windows up in the car and it's just more of a hum. And when the thoughts come, I'm able to manage them a little more than when I'm not meditating. And so that has really helped me um, with my inner peace. And what I shared with you is it took me a few months. And I realized in my content that I was sharing online, I was talking about Summer's behavior being so much better. And all of a sudden I went, oh my gosh, she is reflecting back to me. And of course, she's always has been, but it's just that how often do we take time to reflect, or even take a moment to assess our situation or compare it to how it was. And that was the big eye opener for me after 2 months of committing to committing to a more rigorous meditation program practice, that I saw what a difference it made in both of my children and the relationship with them. So, and that's all tied to how I talk to myself.
Yeah. Janice in the chat box has written something so profound and touching. It's probably going to make me cry. But I'll just read it because it's so beautiful. I have a 1/3 acre pine forest. This winter, I created a rectangular labyrinth in the forest that I could walk in or snowshoe in to get some peace and serenity. This forest is also filled with about 45 to 50 painted or natural wood birdhouses. In early April, I spent some time reflecting on the houses that needed some tender, loving updates, and have spent some time painting and decorating these in a quiet craft room space. My thoughts of caregiving evaporated as I spent time painting and decorating for the spring influx of birds, bees, and butterflies.
Mm. And of course, I love the reference to, I've got chills to the butterflies, for because to me that's just the symbolic nature of butterflies, right? And everything. My favorite quote is, the butterfly is beautiful because the caterpillar is brave.
Mhm.
And I
But it's
just,
also about decorating a home for these
yeah,
creatures. And, you know, I think in this search for, oh, the abandoning the idea that we are somehow responsible for every outcome uh, in our loved one's life.
yes.
And we are, and that our duty is to be hyper vigilant in order to protect their well being. And if we abandon this idea and find some, that we make peace with what it is that we cannot change. And this is Janice's message here, I think, that
Yes.
we are part of a greater universe. And this universe is filled with beauty and life. And that the ordinary is extraordinary. And that it is not a betrayal of love and duty to the people we love who have care needs to
Mhm.
find this sense of peace. Because I know myself that there have been times in my life where I have, for example, been on holiday when I get the call. There's been a medical emergency. Your son is in ICU.
Okay.
And we've taken the first plane home, of course. But, the thought in my head is, oh my God, I took my eye off the ball.
Okay.
I, I, I shouldn't have been looking away, and I think that that's natural. And, that what you said before about self-forgiveness is part of this understanding of what it is that we can and cannot control.
Mm-hmm.
But, sometimes doing self-care is really hard because there are many, I think, reasons to feel that we shouldn't be doing it. And if we do, something awful is going to happen.
So yes, that's so, I'm just like, ooh. It's I think the first comment is one of the, because I like to touch on self-care, on there's so many different activities, and speaking to the touching on the worthiness of really, helping the caregiver realize that caregiving is a role, and that they, I say, I've been a mom for almost 16 years, a caregiver for 13, but I've been Nicole for 48. And so I want to honor Nicole. And it took me a long time because people are always telling me what I should be doing, how I should be acting, what I should be focused on. So it is hard, especially for female caregivers. Like I get that. And so when you were sharing that, it's, that validation that, caregiving is hard, and that as parents, this is a lifelong journey. And, that was one thing, like when I was in the ambulance, all I could think of is like the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
Wait, what would happen to Summer? Like, because, her dad could, but it's just like, but no one can manage the household like I can, sort of thing. And that we are worthy. And that's, why we can start small. So to the point of the pockets or the slivers of time, and, building yourself up to a trip, which everyone does deserve. And I think part of that, whether it be the worthiness, is the, I call it the control audit, of really being able to say, what can I control?
Yeah.
And that if, and it's good for you for going on trips. And I know even if they didn't end up the way, but it's just celebrating and honoring that. Like we don't know, but I think that's such an important message but you still do it.
Yeah. I wanted to get into the risks of self-care a little bit. It's funny because I'm going to the airport later this afternoon. Yep. And it's COVID. It's the first time I've taken a trip in 2 years since, I've been on an airplane. I haven't even been inside in a restaurant in 2 years.
Okay.
And I'm going for a girlfriend reunion to Europe. I know. And it seems so frivolous with Ukraine going on, and in the context of our son's health, and and I remember, sort of the way if my mom would have been still alive and stuff like that, I would have been very worried, and I I am nervous about sort of like taking my eye off the ball. But I had a serious conversation with myself about this trip that I'm taking. And part of it had to do with my age. Like I'm 67 and I feel my age a little bit more. I still work out. One of the things I do for myself is once a week, I do an hour with a virtual personal trainer. I realize how privileged all of this sounds too. And it is privileged. And I always know that. And I always know that. But I thought, I may never, I'm getting old. We just did our wills. And this may never happen again. This is, you said like, I've been Nicole for 48 years and I've been Donna for 67 years. And how many years do I have left? And I feel my mortality. And I think that as caregivers for people with care needs, we do feel our mortality. That's part of, I think, what the panic attack is about too.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know that because I'm not you, but certainly I have had a lot of anxiety about what would happen to the people I love and take care of in my family if I died. And, I've had a few personal health scares myself. And I thought, oh my gosh. So some of this is about the time I have left. as well as I need to make the most of my strength and resilience and be there for the marathon, not the sprint, that is family caregiving.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think we need to balance all of these worries and concerns out with this piece of what we can control. I want to go back to the chat just for 1 second, because Janet says, our 45-year-old son's massive and debilitating stroke has been life-changing in terms of our plans for our lives and retirement. You are absolutely right in saying we try to be all for those who have such intensive life needs. Accepting the things we cannot change is something we have to practice.
Yeah.
That's so true. One day at a time in our household. Yeah, one foot in front of the other, as I always say too. We are so grateful for March of Dimes residential acquired brain injury program that he is currently participating in. Yes, these programs where we can begin to trust that someone else can take care of our children or our loved one and keep them safe. That is a massive piece in self-care, don't you think, Nicole?
Okay, I'm getting emotional because that's something I'm working on. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you know this
It's
from our
hard.
conversations, but like I'm just, yeah, like my Summer's 13. And I mean, yeah, part of the self-care um, looking ahead. And part of that is, what does and I say this not as a judgment, I'm not judging myself, but what does a responsible caregiver look like?
Mm,
Yeah.
this is a very good question.
And part of that is, it is to say what will happen when she ages out of school. And so, you just even use the word trust, and my whole body was just like, oh. And
Yeah.
it's so what I try to uh, remind myself is that everything that I'm doing around my own self-care, it's just little, bricks in my foundation. And it will get me to a place that will make me more resilient, to have those conversations. So what I mean is by processing emotions now that I had buried even from when she was, younger. Um, the I'm still, mourning the idea of the lost sibling relationship that Jordan has with his sister. Like just last week, she was like, he's getting ready for school and she's chasing him around trying to hit him with her iPad. She thinks it's funny. He doesn't. It actually hurts, right? Like she'll throw her iPad at him. And then when he leaves for school, she'll be like, bye, Jordan, love you. Like it does not make any sense. He's frustrated and mad. I'm just like, it's okay, buddy. She loves you. And he's just like had it with her. So like there's like this stuff that we're just trying to like manage. And then but doing that now and doing this work, and whether it be the like inner peace or the ability to have even the awareness,
Yeah.
then it allows us to move forward, or for me to move forward, I think what's it called, sturdier ground.
Yeah. And it's funny you say sturdier ground, because in terms of the kind of self-awareness that you're describing so beautifully. I remember reading a fantastic piece in the New York Times by David Brooks called On Suffering. And he describes how you, when you're presented with great life challenges, you crash through the basement of yourself and you discover another basement underneath. And you think that that's it. But it's not it, because things compound and things happen that are unimaginable, like Janice's 45-year-old son.
Yeah.
This is unimaginable. But you crash through the floor of yourself and you discover more and more basements underneath that you thought did never existed, because it's inconceivable that such health challenges could befall people that we love, particularly someone who's 45. My father was 52 when he had his first stroke, and 54 when he had his third very debilitating stroke. And so these things just aren't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But I think, the question of what does a responsible caregiver look like in such circumstances? And I remember on, LinkedIn, on social media, there was another caregiver author posed a question, and she principally did aging parents. And the question was, are you a responsible daughter? And yeah, I know. That's a big question. Every single action that we take as a caregiver, we say, is this the responsible thing to do? Am I responsible in my actions? And am I responsible in my thoughts and in my character?
But my
Yes.
question to that, though, is as long as you are defining what responsible is, and well, I'm looking at my finger. I'm talking about myself in the sense of really making the decision of, Mike and I, like, okay, what's best for Summer? Like, what do we believe and decide as a family? What is best for our daughter? Not what other families are doing for their child. That I say peer pressure. And the best example I have is we as a family decided we would not remortgage our house to pay for therapies for our daughter.
Okay.
That comes with a lot of guilt.
Yeah, I know, because other people do it all the time.
Do it. And we're like, no, we are not going to say to our son, you cannot play basketball, competitive basketball, and you cannot do this because of your sister. And there is no right or wrong, and there is no judgment, but we actually had that discussion. And even in like, how far are we willing to drive for activities or for a special school? It's like, and again, it's this, and I rarely talk about it because I still feel so much, like it doesn't, other people don't need to know, but it's that whole, like, it's powerful because it's like, oh, but there are other people who are, they would say, move the sun and the earth and the moon for their child. And it's not that I wouldn't, it's just, it looks different. And it took a long time to come to peace with that. And so I can only imagine what that looks like for every caregiver.
Yeah. It's true. It's really interesting. This morning I was preparing for another presentation I'm doing for the Leukemia Society. And it's not specifically about self-care, it's about advocacy. But in advocating for our own needs and for the needs of every individual in the family who is implicated by a disease, by a disease or a disability, or by the needs of aging, everyone is affected by this experience. And so how can we make sure that each person in the family has their needs met to the best of everyone's ability to support each other? And, one of the tools that I think is really great, and people can Google it. It's a McMaster tool from Can Child Research Institute, and it is developed in the context of childhood disability, but I present it to all age groups and all disease groups, and I've presented it to Parkinson caregivers, Alzheimer's caregivers, and it's called the F words of childhood disability. And maybe Jen
Yeah.
or Mary, someone who's helping us with the tech stuff today, could Google it and put the link in the chat box. But it's called the F words. And the F words are, I hope I can remember them, they're 6: function, family, fun, friends, future, and one more, I can't remember.
Okay.
And basically, you just write the things that are, fitness.
Okay.
And you just write under those headings, what does each person in the family want to do for function? That would be school or work. In the context of a progressive disease, it could be something like rehab goals, or it could mean something like, I want to be able to see my grandchildren. That would be a functional goal. And anyway, you just write what matters most to you in these domains of human living. And everybody gets a say. Everybody has goals, their own human goals for human thriving within the circumstances of adversity in the family. And then you can put it all down on the table. These are mine, mine, mine. And how can we support each other to reach each other's goals? And this is a powerful to me, because you asked Mike, how can you help me get to the gym? The gym is my fitness goal, and I need help. I need support to make that happen. And so, because it's always the needs and the aspirations and the goals of the person with the illness or disability seem to have trumped everyone else's.
Yes.
And it doesn't have to be like that. Everybody, because you know what? People with disease and disability, even at the end of their lives, will be trying to help people they love reach their goals. Love is never bi-directional, like it's always bi-directional.
Yeah.
It's like, Summer, I love you.
It's
That's
so
her thing. That's her way of saying, have a great day. Every single person that we know is trying to help and comfort others.
No, that's so true. And I love what you said about that exercise, because it really reminded me of, what I, share with caregivers is that we are allowed to have meaningful lives while we plan for our children or for the person whom we're caring to have meaningful lives. Like, we're all allowed to have meaningful lives despite our circumstances and the chaos. I think one of the things that we danced around but didn't touch on is that within 24 hours, the experiences are all over the place. The emotions we feel, the good, the bad, the joy, the fears, the frustration, and so much more than non-caregivers. And that, when we're talking about self-care, when we're talking about moments of joy, it really is the ability to believe that the day can be peppered with them. And some days, we'll have really good days, And then I'm like, yes. And the next day it's a complete, you know what show. And I'm like, but yesterday was so good. And I'm like, you gotta let that go, Nicole. Like, you, it's just, you gotta ride. And that's what I say. I believe I've become a really good surfer, the ability to ride the waves and to accept I cannot control how summer chooses to show up. And that kind of really goes, but I love that, having that almost game plan, that there's something that we can continually go back to and say, but are we on track? Even though the days can be a little crazy, the fun and the function and the fitness and all of those things are kind of the path or the roadmap.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way to end our discussion today. And Nicole, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a
Oh my
really rich and um, I hope I always hesitate to use this word, but inspiring
God.
discussion. I think it's an overused word in the caregiving world. But I do think it is inspiring. It gives us a starting point and hope that surfing the waves of challenge is possible. This is our way of caring for ourselves, just listening and reflecting on the possibility of self-care. It is not a myth. So thank you, Nicole.